Welcome back. It's the Jeremy Mills podcast, and today we have a very special guest. I'm really excited to have him here because I just watched the extended director's cut of Sonicsgate. It's Adam Brown. Thanks for coming, man.
Nice to see you.
It's been great.
Thanks for having me.
Getting to chat with you a little bit, and like I said, I am fresh off of watching this documentary. For the people who don't know, for you who's new to me, I didn't grow up here. I'm a huge Seattle basketball guy now, but I lived in Kansas, real small town in Kansas from, when I was born to 2011, and then moved out here. So that was 2 or 3 years after the Sonics had left. So I had known the story a little bit. Like I'd known all the characters and known who was bad, but I didn't know the whole story and just the details you guys put into it. And it was awesome. A long-winded way to say it was really awesome.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And certainly we did it out of passion. The city loves the Sonics. Even to this day, we're coming up on 10 years. Actually, almost exactly now was 10 years when we released the movie for the first time in 2009. And all we've seen is the passion grow and grow and grow for people wanting to bring a basketball team back to Seattle. And hopefully we're a little closer now than we were a few years ago.
Yeah, and like you say, the passion is growing and growing, and that's what I see. I see the I don't know if it's underground or what it is. You're talking about Trey Simmons, Abdul Gaddy, Will Conroy, all these staples that we know of that keep it alive, but maybe people outside of Seattle don't. And I see that passion that's so real, and part of me used to think it's because the Sonics aren't here, like they're making up for something almost, putting that much more passion and energy. But the more I realize about it, it's not. It was that way when the Sonics were here.
Yeah, I mean, Seattle's always been a basketball city. I mean, the Sonics were our first major league pro team. Came here in 1967, and through all those decades, were an extremely competitive team on the floor. So many legendary players going back all the way to Lenny Wilkins and Spencer Haywood, all the way up through X-Man, Tom Chambers. Of course, Gary Payton, Sean Kemp, Detlef, and then, Rashard Lewis, Ray Allen, and then Kevin Durant for one season on his Rookie of the Year campaign. So it's always been a basketball city, and I think part of that is the way the seasons are here. We have these long kind of rainy winters that we're just getting into now.
Today,
where it's
almost.
Yeah, it's dark and rainy, and having that indoor sport that you can go play during those rainy times, and just the players that have come out of here speak for themselves. Jamal Crawford, Doug Christie, on down the line. I mean, there's so many. Isaiah Thomas,
Jontay Murray. I was doing a list the other day, and it was funny how many people I was forgetting. So I'm just gonna do this off the top of my head. I'd forgotten Zach LaVine. I'd forgotten, all these guys. There's Dalton Holmes now. He's killer at the crossover this year, but it's like you said, the culture has built that, and it's just cool to see. There's no NBA team in Seattle, but Seattle stays having a team of guys in the NBA. There's no doubt about that.
Right. You could always make a competitive team just with the guys from Seattle. Nate Robinson, Spencer Hawes holding down the big man spot. So. Yeah, DeJounte is going to be fun to watch this year, coming back off that injury.
Matisse Thybulle, murdering it so far in the preseason.
Yes, and so that passion's here, and it's always been here. When we released the movie, it was obviously a really bad time. The team had just left. People were just completely distraught, and now, over the years, you see just as many Sonics jerseys as Seahawks or Mariners or Sounders or Storm. There's just as passionate a fan base here as any of those other teams for a team that hasn't existed for 10 years. And I think that's unprecedented, and really speaks to the passion for basketball of this community. And when we do get a team back, it's going to be just gangbusters. It's going to be such a success off the bat. It was never a result of a lack of fan base. It was, as we outlined in the documentary, it was sort of a perfect storm of political failures and corporate failures and, people with egos at the top, making mistakes. And so, it was never about the fan base. It was all those other factors that came together to rob us of our team. We're just keeping up the fight, man.
And that perfect storm was something that was amazing to me, because not living here, part of me I didn't believe it, but the thought had entered my head that maybe they didn't support the team. I wasn't here. I didn't see the games. I didn't see who was there, what the fandom was like, or anything like that. So getting to see, I guess, that perfect storm of not only the political stuff, which includes already had built 2 arenas recently in Seattle, being like, okay, we're kind of good on building the arenas right now, to, Clay Bennett and the villain that he was, the way you're able to cast him in that light that he cast himself in, really was amazing, because man, he was a villain.
Yeah, he was.
Man,
and
he was a villain.
Yeah, then there are a lot of villains to the story, and of course Howard Schultz being the one who, bought the team and squandered away the public trust, as he referred to the team as being a public trust. Of course, in hindsight, I'm sure he regrets that, but the mistakes that were made at that time really set the table for the team to leave on a political and corporate level. The Sonics were actually first in line to get a arena deal done when Key Arena was remodeled in 1995. Now, unfortunately, there were some political issues there that prevented it from being sort of a world-class facility in terms of size. It ended up being almost immediately obsolete just due to the square footage and the way that the NBA business model quickly changed to not only being based on ticket revenue and ticket sales and TV deals, but also auxiliary dollars that were coming in from restaurants and activities in the arena. So when Key Arena was built, remodeled in 1995, the United Center in Chicago was also unveiled and had twice the square footage. And that became, quickly Key Arena dwindled down to the bottom of the league in terms of that square footage. And, the ways that the luxury suites were presented. And then you had, of course, the Seahawks and Mariners both got new stadiums, which were in the, world class and remain in that world class category a few years later. Those didn't happen without some crazy taxpayer versus politics battles as well. But ultimately they got done and kept those teams here. And, the Sonics, it was a matter of timing. They couldn't go back to that well again as the economics changed of the early 2000s. There was a little more of a recession compared to the 90s, and people did not want to invest taxpayer dollars into publicly funding a stadium, which now, here we are, 20 years later, that's sort of the standard, is that these stadiums should be funded through internal revenue streams and not through the public coffers that could be used for other, public needs. So it's a complicated issue, man. That's why we had to make the documentary. We sort of kind of, we were, always having these conversations in bars and among family and at dinners and all these things. And it would end up being a 3-hour conversation. So it was like, okay, let's put the facts here. And so people can just say, go watch Sonicsgate. Then we can talk about, all the other complexities of the issue.
Right. You were a fan of the team before all of this. You're obviously a huge fan with the history that you know and all of that. The arena was built lacking all of the extra financial stuff it needed, but it was a great basketball venue. They talk about the bowl being cut just right to, make it a great place to watch a basketball game. And when the renovation happened, when did you realize that, this is maybe the first nail in the coffin, or maybe this is something like that,
Well, I'll tell you that me as a fan, I was born in Seattle. I grew up in this area, always have lived, within a few dozen miles of the city proper. And as a fan, I wasn't aware of any of this until the moment that Howard Schultz sold the team. As a fan, I was pretty insulated, and I seen some headlines. Oh, Schultz is unhappy. He's going to Olympia. He wants a new stadium. Nobody actually thought at that time that it was going to result in the team moving. We had seen these things from the Mariners and Seahawks. The Seahawks, they had their bags packed. They were getting ready to leave before Paul Allen stepped in and saved them. So people didn't, I think, understand the gravity of the situation. Certainly as a fan, I didn't. I was just excited. Oh, we made the playoffs, Remember in that 2005 season, I went to those great playoff games with Ray and Richard and Brent Barry and those really fun teams that we had there that sort of took everyone by surprise. But I think that, as a fan, I have great memories of Key Arena. And like you said, the bowl, the intimacy, the noise. I remember going there with my family. We'd do like a 4-game or 6-game package and go see all the games and watch all the rest of the games on TV. And I just remember, it was sort of like the 12s with the Seahawks. We were always known to be the loudest, most involved fan base. I remember, chanting, counting when Karl Malone was at the free throw line, because he would famously sort of do his little routine that would take more than 10 seconds. And, it's just always, Seattle has always had that passionate fan base that felt that we as fans could be involved in affecting the outcome of the game. So those are my memories of Key Arena growing up. And then, of course, all that came crashing down as soon as Howard Schultz sold the team to Clay Bennett and the Oklahoma group in 2006.
That's what I wanted to know. You explained it so well, of just what it's like to live in a city with professional basketball. I'm such a huge fan, but I've lived in a small town with nothing. And then here with, lacking the Sonics. Taking it back to the documentary a little bit, when did you meet the director, Jason Reed?
Yeah, so going back to sort of the Save Our Sonics era, right? So the team was sold in 2006. And at that time, I was still just sort of a fan, and I would participate in the Seattle Times message boards, which were a big thing at that time, pre-Twitter, social media as we know it today. And so people would post about politics and sports and things on the Seattle Times message boards.
And what year was this, do you think?
This was 2006.
Okay.
This was like 06, 07. And then I became aware of Save Our Sonics, the nonprofit group led by Brian Robinson and Stephen Pyatt, through the Seattle Times message boards. Posted a comment like, "Hey, I want to help. I just want to help as a volunteer," because that was sort of when it sunk in that this might really happen. This team actually might be leaving if some things don't realign. And so I got a call from Brian Robinson based on that message board post. I ended up volunteering with Save Our Sonics as a volunteer media coordinator, or however you would phrase it, where I was sort of helping organize rallies, working with a really passionate group of fans, doing press releases, sort of helping out there. And at some of those meetings, there was a guy there who came with a little camera crew to a couple of the meetings. And if you know Jason, or if you've seen him doing media, he's got this big blonde head of hair, and he's kind of a very active energy guy who stands out in a room. And so I noticed him immediately, oh, who's that guy with the cameras? And so it wasn't until much later that we actually started working together, but I got his business card. And then after the team left, I organized this concert at Numos with a bunch of the local hip-hop community that was designed to spread awareness or raise support for this thing called Senate Bill 6116, which would have held Clay Bennett accountable for that final $30 million that he ended up getting off the hook for, because the legislature did not act in funding Key Arena at that time. So we were doing this hip hop show and just trying to do good PR for the community, and it all came together. And it's who do I know who can come film this? Oh, that guy, that guy with the crazy hair. And he came, and him and Colin Baxter, who's the executive producer of Sonicsgate, came, and they filmed the show. And then I went and started editing the footage. And at this time, I knew nothing about video production. I knew, my background was in journalism, and I'd worked some professional marketing and copywriting type jobs for software companies. And then I was playing guitar in bands. So I knew nothing about the filmmaking process, but I knew about sort of journalism, which is sort of step one, or a related field. And so I just went over and I started editing the footage with them. They showed me how to use Final Cut to edit that footage. And then within a few weeks, we sort of started talking. They started talking we want to do a documentary. And I was like, well, let's do it. I'll start making some calls. Let's book some interviews. And then we were just off to the races at that point. And here we are 10 years later. I've been working with these guys along with the other core members of the Sonicsgate team, Darren Lund, editor, Colin White, and Ian Connors shot all the interviews. Let's see, make sure I'm not forgetting any of the core people in that. But yeah, we've been working together ever since. These guys are like my best friends now. And it really is kind of a crazy way that the universe came together on that project to start something, that's been a major change and very relevant in my life personally.
Yeah, like I said, it's a great documentary that it makes you feel something, and that's all you can hope for is somebody who puts anything out. Making such a big thing like this, do you start with interviews? Is it meetings with all these people talking about, the ideas, how that's going to kind of go?
Right. So before we officially started production, Jason had already been recording all the press conferences and recording at that time. You had to manually record onto DVRs and then burn those onto DVDs and then make sure, those were stashed away. And so he always had it in his mind, like, if this goes wrong and the team leaves, I'm going to have this evidence and have these press conferences recorded. And then Colin Baxter had the thing in his mind where he was like, when we do this, I want to release it for free online, which at that time, there was no Netflix streaming. There was no, feature-length movies on streaming online wasn't really a thing at that time, other than like a few conspiracy movies like Zeitgeist was out and
That's
Loose Change. And, there were a couple that sort of told us like this can be done and this is a good way to like spread your idea is to just remove the paywall, put it up. But at that time, YouTube wouldn't allow you to upload a full thing over 10 minutes. So we had to apply to a special account. So that was Colin's vision, was to make sure that this was free and just out there, and we weren't going to take it to film festivals. And so, yeah, those were sort of the foundational ideas behind the project. And then when I dove in and just started booking these interviews, that was when it sort of became real. And we thought that we might book 9 or 10 interviews. We ended up doing 41. So again, the support and the momentum really just built based on, word of mouth. And we did a couple of small Kickstarters. I think we raised like $5,000 on Kickstarter. We released a trailer, and then that dominoed into some people seeing the trailer and participating in the project from there. So it really was just, and I was very naive to the process of filmmaking and how sort of magical that was at the time. We were just sort of doing it because we're passionate, and we thought, at the very least, this will be a cathartic release for us and all the Sonics fans who were dedicated to the team. And of course, it became much larger than we thought it would, and sort of became this battle cry for bringing the team back and a rallying point for the community to do that.
Right.
But I think I answered your question. But yeah, interview. So it's sort of like the foundational idea, and then interviews, and then as we're getting more interviews, then the editing starts, and then we continue to get more interviews until like 3 weeks before the release, we were still doing interviews. So I would not recommend that to anybody.
Because it's, these great little clips that are perfect, but that's from, I'm sure, a longer interview that you had. All right, how does this work with this? And
yeah,
it's a lot of work.
The editing, the post-production, definitely, like, it can take shape a million different ways. And I think that's, of course, we had the 2-hour cut that's available free on YouTube, and then we recut it for CNBC in 2012, and then later that 45-minute version aired on ESPN Classic, and so there's a few different versions floating out there that people can check out.
Yeah, and do check it out. We talked a little bit about when, as a fan, you could even first fathom that the Sonics may leave. When did you really believe that, okay, this is probably going to start happening?
It's really crazy to think about, because right up until the day it was official, we as fans still thought we had a chance to fight and keep the team, because the Sonics had an ironclad lease with the city for 2 more years. So the lease would have gone through 2010. And Greg Nichols and the city council ultimately settled that lawsuit and took the buyout for $45 million in 2008 to let them out 2 years early. So really right up until that moment that buyout occurred, we, as Save Our Sonics and the fans, we all thought we have a strong case.
Seemed like they were in position to
we
win.
have 2 more years. We have 2 more years for Kevin Durant to develop as the next Ken Griffey Jr. or Gary Payton or Russell Wilson type figure that this community, falls in love with. And 2 more years, more importantly, for a guy like Steve Ballmer or, other people to work with the politicians to figure out the arena problem. So, yeah, it was really right up until that last minute, man. And we were doing, the courthouse rallies, and we were doing all kinds of activities. We were rallying down in Olympia. Really, this whole experience, very quickly changed us from, armchair fans to armchair politicians or, political activists, because we had to get involved in knowing about leases and stadium funding and the different tax things and all these, and the ways that various relationships evolved in between city council members and House of Representatives members. So yeah, the whole thing was pretty crazy how, these fans, I mean, the ultimate lesson, and it's kind of sad, but, fans are powerless. The fans fought hard. We did everything we could. But, there are forces beyond the fans that truly control what happens with these teams, which are supposed to be, public trust of the community. But I think Sonicsgate showed that can't be taken for granted.
And it leads back to money, unfortunately, in the end, is what it made me think. Before we get to the end, though, and for the people who don't know the details, can you kind of describe why Howard Schultz is described as public enemy number 1?
Right. So, yeah, there are a lot of villains to the story. Of course, we're not letting David Stern, the commissioner of the NBA, off the hook for, his backroom buddy deals with Clay Bennett. And, of course, the Bennett and Aubrey McClendon and the Oklahoma ownership group lied, and we're not going to let them off the hook. And then our local city officials, from Greg Nichols to the House of Representatives, Frank Chop, these guys all made mistakes and were complicit in what happened. But Howard Schultz was the one who owned the team, and ultimately he's the one who felt that the best way that he could do this was to sell to an out-of-town ownership group. He claims to put true pressure on the elected officials to get things done. But he was the one who bought the team, started a feud with the number 1 star, Gary Payton. Howard Schultz thought that he could reshape the way that business was done in the NBA. He tried, he comes from the story of, coming from nothing and sort of his life arc of, poverty into success with Starbucks and everything that he implemented there. And he's sort of become a cult-like figure and gives lots of talks about how you can be like me and all my success. And he's written all these books about it. And so he tried to apply that model of success to the NBA. Now, the NBA is not a coffee franchise. The NBA is its own thing. And there's, players who have millions of dollars in their contracts and attachments to the community. And so first thing you should do is probably not start a feud in public over a contract with the greatest, most beloved star player, Gary Payton. So he did that, and then he also was feuding simultaneously with the local government about the lease. Whether his concerns were valid or not, he went about it in sort of a way where he felt he was owed something. It was sort of immediately toxic in terms of those talks. The way that things get done in the Seattle process is painful. It's not an easy politics town. We debate everything to death. It might take 5 years to do something that maybe should only take 1 year, but everyone has to have their say. Everyone has to, be part of the process, and then decisions get made. So, Howard went to the city to renegotiate the lease, which was the worst lease in the league and in the smallest, least revenue generating facility. So there were some issues there, but, it was sort of just the way that he went to them and the way that he went to Olympia for taxpayer dollars felt combative and like he was asking for a handout and that he was above the process, and it immediately just became toxic. So, ultimately he was the one who controlled the asset of the Seattle Supersonics and sold it to the Oklahoma City ownership group. With all those toxic dominoes falling along the way, that's why we blame him number one.
Mm-hmm. And he is a villain in this story, but there's also a couple heroes that I didn't realize, like Steve Ballmer that you mentioned, came in and offered to give a whole lot of money to keep the team here. Can you kind of explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so Steve Ballmer, the one of the Microsoft co-founders, huge sports fan and owns the Clippers now, but always been a big sports fan. So he came through sort of after Clay Bennett owned the team, and Steve Ballmer made, at the time, a revolutionary arena offer where it was going to be a 50-50 deal as opposed to a 100% taxpayer dollars deal or a 90% taxpayer dollars deal. We have these charts in Sonicsgate. I want to make sure I say the right numbers, but I want to say that Howard Schultz's deal was a $220 million Key Arena renovation where only $18 million was privately funded. So it was almost entirely public dollars. And so when Ballmer came with the 50-50 split deal, they were offering way more money out of their private pockets. And so this was a great deal in those times. And it was just too late. Clay Bennett already owned the team, and you can't force an owner to sell a team unless they have some pretty serious scandals that are bigger than basketball.
Right.
But so it was ultimately too late, and then Ballmer was part of the Chris Hansen group that was trying to get the Soto Arena built, which of course we supported, and unfortunately the city council did not approve that. But Ballmer now owns the Clippers. I think it's a good thing for Seattle that he's in those rooms. There's only 30 NBA teams. There's only 30, majority owners who get to be in these rooms and talk about what's next for the NBA and whether they're going to expand or relocate a team. I think it's good to have a Seattle basketball advocate like Steve Ballmer in those rooms. And, I also commend the Lewicki group who've done what seemed impossible 15 years ago, and they got a Key Arena remodel approved by all the politicians. Now, they did that using all private money, so that's a much easier thing for people to swallow than these deals that Schultz was proposing 15 years ago, where it was dollars were coming out of the public bin.
Right. So Clay Bennett, huge person in this story. Why is it ridiculous to argue that he made a good faith effort to keep the team in Seattle?
The good faith effort. So when Schultz sold the team to Clay Bennett, Schultz claimed that he had other offers from people who definitely would have moved the team, and the reason he chose Clay Bennett was because Bennett agreed to a side letter that, which is not a legally binding thing, but a side letter that said he would make a good faith effort to get an arena deal done in Seattle before considering any type of relocation. So what that meant was that Bennett proposed a $500 million arena in Renton that was almost entirely publicly financed, and he knew had 0% chance of actually being approved, just based on the politics of Seattle at that time and the Northwest. This was sort of the bare minimum thing, but he did get some people on board as sort of mouthpieces for this, and did all the sort of bare minimum things like, look, I'm making a good faith best effort, while simultaneously gutting the team from the inside. We were all so excited when we drafted Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant, once in a lifetime, once in a generation type NBA player. You knew coming out of college that he was just built to be an NBA star. And we were so excited on draft night, and then immediately they trade Ray Allen and Rashard Lewis. So we didn't get a chance to see, sort of a good team surrounding a rookie Kevin Durant. They traded him for spare parts and future draft picks.
Which worked out well for them later on.
It did, although they never
Kinda.
won a championship.
Kind of, yeah.
OKC is cursed. OKC will never win a championship. They are a cursed franchise for this whole robbery, and I hope they go 0-82 every season. Let's just make that clear. So, the owners, they were saying one thing and doing another, and then gutting the team from the inside. They had a franchise worst 20-62 record, the worst Sonics team ever built. It was, of course, designed to drive fans away. They moved the broadcast to a radio station that you could barely find on the dial.
And a conservative station at that in Seattle.
Right. These were all intentional moves. They wouldn't allow players to have media access in the same way that they used to. So just every step of the way trying to drive a wedge between the fans and the team and set up for the move. So that those teams became, Russell Westbrook, who was actually drafted with a Sonics hat on like a month before the move, and James Harden. Those are draft picks that were built on the backs of Seattle fans in those losing seasons, and then of course designed to come to fruition in Oklahoma City. Karma took care of that, luckily, and they didn't win that championship. And that's why the good faith effort is ridiculous to say that he actually did. And then, of course, you have the emails that came out through Discovery.
You're not just some salty fan. There is receipts.
There are receipts, and there were those emails between Aubrey McClendon and the rest of the ownership group that showed they were explicitly not trying to make it work in Seattle. The goal was always to go to Oklahoma City. So that was a direct violation of the entire premise of purchasing the team. But, again, I have truly nothing against the fans of Oklahoma City. Again, this is not about fans. The fans of Seattle did nothing wrong. The fans of Oklahoma City have done nothing wrong. The players who choose to, have contracts in Oklahoma City, they're just making a living playing basketball. I have nothing against them. Shout out to Nick Collison, still nothing but love.
Shout out to Abdul Gaddy from Seattle on the Thunder right now.
Right. So, you got to do what you got to do. There's only so many opportunities to play basketball professionally. So, our beef is with the owners, and certainly the number one villain is Howard Schultz, and we keep coming back to that. But
how do you think he would tell this story differently? And I'm sure we've had that, or maybe what feedback have you gotten from any of their sides or Oklahoma City people where they're like, well, no, you're painting this all crazy, you're making them look bad?
Right. I mean, usually we just tell people to watch Sonicsgate, because a lot of times, the mistaken impression is that Seattle did not support the team, and that's why they left. I think that was sort of the PR line that the fans of Oklahoma City were fed, was that, Seattle didn't want him, so we took him and we gave him a home. Well, that's not really true. The fan support was here. It was all this perfect storm of politics and corporate failures. But, I think that we gave all those guys a chance to tell their story, and they all declined to be interviewed for Sonicsgate. There is a new podcast documentary series on The Ringer called Sonic Boom that we participated in, and I think that they have done a lot of really good research, and we may end up hearing some new tidbits of information as that series goes along. So I'm excited to hear what they've done in terms of, being able to, from a national perspective, get a little more information out there, things that have evolved or emerged in the last decade. I think, everyone, there's multiple sides to every story. I feel like we really made an effort to give it journalistic integrity and not just make it, a kumbaya Seattle thing. We interviewed Chris Van Dyke, the leader of Citizens for More Important Things, who fought against the arena funding. We interviewed Brad Keller, who was Clay Bennett's attorney throughout this entire process. So we tried to, make sure that we told that other side of the story as much as we could at the time.
And to kind of wrap up, I've talked about me loving the documentary, but it fired me up, and just gave me another view on this whole Seattle basketball culture. So great job to you. Great job to Jason, all the guys that were involved. Sherman Alexie was awesome. He's one of my favorite people in this documentary. I don't know if you know who John Trudell is, but he just has that same way of speaking that it just is passionate. So shout out to him. It made me understand as a Kansas person what the Sonics actually meant for the city, because I see it without it now, and it's different. But as this podcast has touched on a lot, it was a class thing, and money ultimately won in the end. And so it's crazy for you. Now that this has all happened, we're 10 years later, almost to the date. What do you see in the Seattle basketball culture? Do you stay up on it, or you go into the crossover, all the things that have filled in to kind of help keep basketball alive?
Yeah, I think the basketball culture here is as strong as ever, and you still have those great tournaments like the crossover. I mean, Jamal Crawford has truly carried the torch, and through his involvement in the community, not just the basketball community, but the community as a whole, serving underprivileged communities. That's something that I think gets overlooked in this whole story, is the way that having a basketball team in a city, it's not just about the people who can afford to go to the games. It's about the community and the culture and people who watch the games and the way that those players interact with the community. I live in the South End, and there's still a bunch of courts that the Sonics dedicated. They're kind of, the logos are faded now, and it sort of speaks volumes about the whole thing. But the way that the players and the culture interact with the community, it's really something special, and that's not going away. And we have, it's just organic. It's part of what Seattle is, and I look forward to it continuing. I mean, yeah, we definitely, I still watch NBA all the time. The Sonicsgate crew and I are part of a 14-team fantasy basketball league that's drafting on Monday that is very intense. And so that's sort of how we keep up on the players, even without having the Sonics here. I can tell you, Marquise Chris is going to the Warriors. He might be a sleeper in fantasy this year, and all these ways that we stay connected. And I think that a lot of my friends are through either basketball or music, and these are things that they truly do have cultural value, and in the way that they help people keep in touch across and help people understand each other across demographics and things that you might not normally interact with somebody. But when the Seahawks are going to the Super Bowl, or when the Sonics have a playoff run, the whole city rallies around that in a way that is tangible. And the basketball community is here. I love going to the crossover, and Isaiah Thomas has a tournament that he does. What is that? The
Shout out Zeke. Shout out Tacoma.
And I was actually at the crossover the day that Durant came back.
Wow.
So there's an iPhone video up there on the web from me, just like with Durant walking across for the first time, coming back to play in Seattle, and he got this crazy ovation, and him and Spencer Hawes were there, passing to each other and doing dunks, and Jamal, and it's I guess I kind of don't know anything else. I don't know what it's like in other cities, but it does feel like massively real here in terms of the basketball culture. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going away. I mean, if it was going to go away, it would have already, I think. So it's here to stay. And we're just trying to, use Sonicsgate as a platform to help, rally support, and whether that be for, these community activities, or for people to be politically involved. Definitely, go register to vote. It's really important. Be involved in your local political action. And of course, supporting both the Lywicki group and their efforts in Key Arena, and the Hanson group and their efforts in Soto, and anyone else who's trying to bring basketball and the NBA back to Seattle. It's not easy. There's only 30 of these teams, and I don't know if the league's going to expand. They've kind of got the collective bargaining agreement, and the math of the league is a lot better now than it was in 2005 2005 when Schultz, wanted the new arena. That's part of the perfect storm too, was that the way that the revenue sharing and the collective bargaining agreement was set up was not as ideal then as it is now. So I don't know if they're going to expand, but either way, Seattle finally has some momentum on the arena front, and we'll be ready for a team when it's available.
Absolutely. And while there's not a team available, watching Kevin Calabro on the documentary, great, love him also, but it got me thinking of the Blazers, where he's at now. As a Sonics fan, how many games are you going down to Portland to see? And when did that, because they were obviously rivals, when did that stop? When were you like, all right, I gotta go watch these Blazers games?
So Damian Lillard was my number one pick in fantasy last year, and that was so fun just watching him play, the way that he plays, how he's a true warrior, how now he's stepping back and hitting these shots from 30 feet. And of course, that dagger that he put in Oklahoma City's entire existence, I would say that was the greatest sports moment for me, or certainly the greatest NBA moment for me since the Sonics left, was that dagger that he put. And of course, Kawhi lured Paul George to come to the Clippers, and then Westbrook's gone, and now they just have a bunch of draft picks, and they're going to have to experience what it's like to cheer for, a losing team, or at least not a contending team for a while. So that was great. And so, I have some love for the Blazers and Damian Lillard, and of course, Paul Allen's legacy, but it's just not the same. I never have been able to adopt them as my actual team in the same way that I love the Sonics as my team, as part of my soul. The Blazers were our rival. I go back to the eras in the 80s and 90s where the Sonics Blazers, the I-5 rivalry, and that was real. We hated them as much as we hated the Lakers or the Suns or the Jazz or any of the other, Warriors, the Western Conference rivals at that time. So, I definitely, we went to a few Blazers games after the team left. The Sonicsgate, part of our thing was this No Team is Safe campaign, where we would go to other, when Oklahoma would come to other arenas, we would go in our Sonics gear and make a big stink behind the bench and wave our Sonics flags. And so we did that a bunch for the first several years. And that's quieted down a little bit. In no short reason because I have a kid now, so my time and my money is a little more thin than it used to be in that era. But I love going to games. I think that I try to make an effort to at least go to one NBA game, either in Portland or if we happen to be in production in another city. Went to a Knicks game, went to a Sixers game, went to a Suns game when we happen to be doing like film productions in those cities and the schedule worked out. So still just love NBA and go as much as I can, but none of it will ever replace the Sonics, and that magic of the green and gold and that logo and the way, those intros I remember, in Key Arena, I used to get chills when the lights would go out and Squatch would come down from the ceiling and they'd play the music and it was your Seattle Supersonics. And you brought up Kevin Calabro. I would say that, Calabro to me was one of my biggest heroes in life. I mean, I love the guy. I went to school for communication and journalism for a while there. I used to think I wanted to be a play-by-play guy. I used to, in college we would, mute the TV and see who could go around and call the games, and I would take that real seriously with, 6 beers in my hand or whatever. But Kevin Calabro is one of the greatest to ever do it, and we were lucky to have him. Really all the Seattle teams have had tremendous, not only players, but play-by-play announcers and owners with a few exceptions. And, it's all part of the experience. I love Kevin Calabro and nothing but love for him for going to the Blazers. There's only so many opportunities. So you got to have the greatest in the game still doing it.
In the Pacific Northwest, at least.
Yeah.
And just to wrap it up, from all Sonics fans, from people who are not here but are a part of the Seattle basketball community now, thank you for putting all that hard work together, making a great documentary. If the people haven't seen it, it's Sonicsgate, A Requiem for a Team, not uncut, but the director's cut on YouTube. Check it out. It's free. Trust me, you'll be locked in. Is there anything you'd like to say to the Seattle basketball community?
Well, one of our hashtags is keep hoop alive. So just keep hoop alive, just keep doing it. You've already been doing it, so just keep it going. I feel like things are in a more positive place now than they have been in a long time, just with the Key Arena remodel and that group really working hard. And, we'll just see how it goes, but don't let it die. Stay active and spread the word. Tell people to watch Sonicsgate if they haven't already.
And that's the Jeremy Mills Podcast, and we'll see you.